My name's Mark, and I'm 37 years old. For almost 12 years, I thought I was living a dream with my wife, Caroline. We met in college when I was this shy, awkward engineering major, and she was this vibrant, charismatic woman who lit up every room she walked into. I don't know how I got so lucky. She seemed like the kind of woman who could have anyone she wanted, and yet, she chose me. It felt like winning the lottery, honestly. We built a life together. A comfortable one, I'd say. We bought a house, settled into our routines, and even adopted a scruffy little mutt named Sparky, who became our baby. I thought we were a team. Sure, we had our rough patches, like any couple, but I always believed we were stronger together. Caroline was my best friend, my partner, my rock. I trusted her completely, and I thought she felt the same way about me. But, looking back, maybe I was just too wrapped up in my own world to notice the cracks forming around us. Over the past year, things started changing between us. She was on her phone more, going out late, and brushing off my questions with a quick, "Just catching up with the girls," or "Work was crazy today." I wanted to believe her, of course. Why wouldn't I? We had years of history, and I never had a reason to doubt her. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe I was reading too much into things. After all, she'd been under a lot of stress with work, and I thought maybe she just needed some space. But then, there were nights when she didn't come home until the early hours, nights when she barely said a word to me, as if I was some invisible fixture in our house. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped sharing little stories from her day. Our conversations became short, polite exchanges, like we were distant acquaintances instead of a married couple. It hurt, but I kept quiet, thinking it would blow over. Then, a week ago, everything changed. I was sitting at home, going through some work emails when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, just a single line. "Thought you should know." There was a photo attached, a picture of Caroline, sitting in a restaurant with some guy I didn't recognize, leaning in close, looking at him like I hadn't seen her look at me in years. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My hands started shaking, and I just sat there, staring at the screen, hoping this was some kind of twisted joke. But deep down, I knew it was real. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she was looking at him. It wasn't just a casual dinner. It was something more, something that had been going on for a while. The anger hit me first, like a wave crashing over me. How could she do this to me? After everything we'd been through, after all the years I spent trusting her, loving her, supporting her, I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers. But instead, I sat in silence, staring at that picture, letting the reality sink in. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in that photo, saw the way she was with him. The betrayal was eating away at me, but there was a strange, almost eerie calm that settled over me as I lay there, staring at the ceiling. By morning, I had made up my mind. If she wanted to live a double life, then I would give her exactly what she wanted, an exit from our marriage. The next few days were a blur. I went to a lawyer, got the divorce papers drawn up, and planned my next move. I found out from a mutual friend that Caroline had a reservation at her favorite restaurant for Saturday night, and that's when it hit me. Instead of confronting her in some heated argument at home, I'd let her little secret come to light in a way she'd never forget. So there I was, sitting in my car outside the restaurant, watching from a distance. I couldn't bring myself to go in, to see her with him, but I arranged for the waiter to deliver the divorce papers to her table, right as they were settling in for their romantic dinner. I told myself I'd just sit back and wait, let her have her perfect evening ruined in the most unexpected way. And as I sat there, phone in hand, I got the message I'd been waiting for, papers delivered. I could only imagine the look on her face, the shock, the confusion, and the panic that would follow. But then, something I hadn't planned for happened. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number, saying, "She's on her way to you." My stomach dropped. I hadn't counted on her coming straight home. I wasn't sure I was ready to face her, to see the person I had loved all these years turned into someone I no longer recognized. I took a deep breath, tried to steady my shaking hands, and braced myself. Whatever was about to come through that door, I knew my life was about to change forever. I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the front door as if it might burst open any second. I tried to prepare myself for whatever storm was about to walk through that door, but nothing could have braced me for the moment Caroline stepped inside. She looked furious, a mix of shock and rage twisting her usually composed face. In her hand, she clutched the divorce papers, her knuckles white as she clenched them tightly. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with this incredulous look, like I was the one who had betrayed her. "Really, Mark? This?" she finally hissed, shaking the papers in the air. "You had to humiliate me like that? In front of everyone?" I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep from matching her anger. "Humiliate you?" I said, barely able to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "I think you've done a good job of that yourself, Caroline." She scoffed, her eyes narrowing as she glared at me. "You don't understand. You don't know what's been going on. This was low, even for you." For a second, her words cut through my anger, making me question myself. Had I gone too far? But then, the image of that photo on my phone, of her leaning in close to that man, flickered through my mind, and any sympathy I might have felt vanished. "You think I don't understand?" I shot back, my voice shaking. "I understand perfectly well. I've been sitting here, trusting you, giving you the benefit of the doubt, while you've been out there, doing whatever with whoever." She hesitated, something flickering in her expression, but then she quickly replaced it with defiance. "It's not what you think, Mark," she said, crossing her arms. "David, he's just a friend, someone I can talk to when I need support. You've been so distant lately. What did you expect me to do? Just a friend? Really?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Is that what you tell yourself to make it sound better? So that it doesn't feel like a betrayal?" She winced, just for a second, but then her walls went up again. "You don't know what it's like to be with someone who's always working, always distracted. You stopped caring about us a long time ago." I felt my chest tighten. There it was, the blame, the way she twisted everything to make it my fault. Typical Caroline, always deflecting, never taking responsibility. I wanted to scream at her, to force her to admit what she'd done, but somehow, I managed to keep my voice steady. "So that's your excuse?" I asked, shaking my head. "You cheat because I've been working hard to give us a good life? To pay for this house? For the things you wanted? You think that justifies going behind my back?" She didn't answer, just looked away, her jaw tight. In that moment, I realized she wasn't sorry. She didn't regret what she'd done. She was just angry that she'd been caught, that her perfect little affair had been shattered in front of her. But I wasn't finished. I had one more thing to say, one more blow I knew would cut through her defenses. "I didn't just send those papers to you," I said quietly, watching as her eyes widened. "Your parents got a copy too. I thought they'd want to know what their precious daughter has been up to." Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. You sent it to them? Why would you do that, Mark?" "Because they deserve to know the truth, Caroline. I deserve to have the truth known." I stood up, feeling a strange sense of power as I looked down at her. For years, I had let her walk over me, make excuses, manipulate situations to suit her. But not this time. This time, she couldn't twist things around. Caroline looked stunned, lost for words. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her hands shook as she clutched the papers, her gaze darting around like she was searching for a way out of this mess. "I trusted you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but somehow it felt like the loudest thing in the room. "I gave you everything, Caroline, and you threw it all away for, what? A fling? A cheap thrill with some friend?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if she didn't even know what to say. It was like watching a mask crack, the carefully constructed image she'd built around herself falling to pieces right in front of me. Finally, she found her voice, but it came out shaky, uncertain. "You don't understand. It's not that simple, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you. Too late for that, I replied coldly. The damage is done. There was a long silence between us, a thick, suffocating tension that filled the room. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong move away from spiraling into anger, into pain, into something I couldn't control. But I held back. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Get out, I finally said, pointing towards the door. Go back to your friend, or whoever you need support from. We're done. Caroline looked at me, her face a mixture of anger and despair. She opened her mouth to argue, to try and twist things one more time, but I held up my hand. I don't want to hear it, Caroline. Just leave. Without another word, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the empty house, leaving me standing there, alone, in the silence that followed. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, a hollow ache in my chest where my love for her had once been. As I stood there, I realized this was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and I knew that Caroline wasn't going to go quietly. She would fight. She would twist the story. She would make herself the victim in any way she could. But I was ready. I had spent too many years letting her control the narrative, and this time, I wasn't backing down. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. I assumed that, after slamming the door and storming out, Caroline would disappear to process everything or maybe run straight into David's arms. Either way, I thought I'd have a few days of peace to gather my thoughts and figure out the next steps. But I should have known better. This was Caroline we were talking about. She wasn't the type to go down without a fight. The next day, I got a call from her mother. Now, I've always had a decent relationship with my in-laws, or so I thought. They were supportive, a bit distant, but we'd managed to get along over the years. But this call? It was something else entirely. Mark, her mother's voice was tight, cold even. When I picked up, I just received documents. Divorce papers? Yes, I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. I wasn't about to be bullied or guilt-tripped by anyone. Not after everything I'd been through. What's going on? She demanded. I don't understand. Caroline hasn't told us anything. All we know is that you've suddenly decided to end the marriage and humiliate her in public. Her words hit me like a slap. Humiliate her? She was the one who had been lying, sneaking around, betraying our vows. But I could already see the angle Caroline was playing. She hadn't told them the truth. She'd painted herself as the victim. Did she tell you why I filed for divorce? I asked, holding my breath, half hoping that maybe Caroline had come clean, that she'd admitted what she'd done. There was a long pause. She said you've been difficult, her mother finally said. That you've been working too much, neglecting her, making her feel unappreciated. I could feel my blood boiling. Caroline was really going to spin this, make me out to be the villain in all of this. I wanted to yell, to tell her mother exactly what had happened, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Caroline had already set the stage, and if I came out swinging, it would just make me look even worse. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But I think there are things Caroline isn't telling you. I'd appreciate it if you could respect my decision. This is between Caroline and me. She didn't respond, just hung up without another word. I sat there, phone still in my hand, feeling this sinking weight in my chest. I knew Caroline was going to make this messy, but I hadn't expected it to start this quickly. She was already gathering her allies, already twisting the story to make herself look like the innocent one. And then, that afternoon, I got another surprise. A mutual friend of ours, Emily, called me up, her voice filled with hesitation. Emily had been Caroline's friend first, but over the years, she'd become close to both of us. She wasn't the type to take sides or get involved in drama, which made her call all the more unsettling. Hey, Mark, she started, sounding uneasy. I heard something from Caroline, and I wanted to ask you directly, just to hear your side. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Let me guess. Caroline told you I'm the bad guy? Emily hesitated. Well, She did mention that you've been distant lately. That you've been, I don't know, shutting her out? I felt the frustration bubble up inside me. Emily, do you know why I filed for divorce? No, she replied softly. She didn't say. Just that things had gotten bad between you two. She's been seeing someone else, Emily, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That's why I filed. I found out she's been with some guy from her office. There was a long silence on the other end. Oh, Mark, I had no idea. I didn't want this, I continued, the bitterness seeping into my voice. I loved her. I trusted her. And she threw it all away for what? A thrill? A fling? Emily was silent, but I could hear her breathing, like she was trying to process everything I just told her. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. I thought. She made it sound like you were the one who was pushing her away. Is that what she's been telling everyone? I asked, clenching my jaw. That I was the problem? That I drove her to this? She didn't say it outright, but yeah, I think that's what she wants people to believe. It was like a knife twisting in my chest. I had loved Caroline, trusted her with everything, and now she was out there, tearing me down, rewriting history to suit her narrative. I knew people would believe her. She was charming, convincing, and I was just me, the quiet, hard-working husband who had let himself be blindsided. But I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story without a fight. Thanks for letting me know, Emily, I said, my voice hardening. I appreciate it. We hung up, and I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Caroline wasn't just trying to walk away from our marriage. She was trying to destroy me in the process. She wanted everyone to believe that I was the one who'd driven her to this, that I was some distant, neglectful husband who had pushed her into another man's arms. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. If she wanted a war, she would get one. I started making a list. Names, people we both knew, people who might hear her version of the story. I would reach out to them, tell them the truth, set the record straight. I wasn't going to let Caroline smear my name and walk away unscathed. I thought about her parents, about the disappointment in her mother's voice, the way she'd looked at me as if I was the one who had failed. It hurt, knowing that Caroline had turned even her own family against me. But I knew, deep down, that the truth would come out eventually. All I had to do was keep going, keep pushing forward, and not let her lies get the best of me. As I sat there, staring at the divorce papers on the table, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but maybe it was the one I needed. Caroline had shown me who she really was, and there was no going back. I wasn't just ending a marriage, I was reclaiming my life. The day after Emily's call, I woke up feeling a strange sense of determination. I knew Caroline had already spread her version of events to anyone who'd listen, painting herself as the wounded wife left out in the cold by her workaholic husband. But I wasn't about to sit back and let her turn me into the villain of her story. If she wanted to play dirty, then I'd play just as hard. The first person I called was my best friend, Ryan. Ryan and I had been friends since high school. He'd been the best man at our wedding, and over the years, he'd seen Caroline and me through every up and down. If there was anyone I could trust to have my back, it was him. "Hey man," Ryan answered, sounding half asleep. "What's up?" "I need to talk to you about something," I said, taking a deep breath. "It's about Caroline." There was a pause, and I could practically hear him sitting up straighter. "Is everything okay?" I heard some rumors, but I didn't want to pry. "She's been seeing someone else," I said bluntly, "and she's trying to twist the whole story to make it look like I'm the bad guy. I filed for divorce, and she's out there telling people I pushed her away, that I neglected her." Ryan let out a low whistle. Wow, I knew something was off, but damn, Mark, I'm so sorry. That's messed up. "Yeah, it is," I replied, feeling a wave of relief just hearing his voice. "I just wanted you to hear it from me, you know? I don't want people thinking I drove her to this." Ryan was silent for a moment, and then he said, "Look, man, I've known you forever. I know you'd never do something like that. If Caroline wants to lie, that's on her. But I'm here for you. Whatever you need. It was the reassurance I needed. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this mess. I spent the rest of the day reaching out to a few other close friends, people who might have heard her side and needed to know the truth. Each call was draining, like reopening a wound over and over, but I couldn't just sit back and let Caroline ruin my reputation without a fight. That night, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe I could get through this, that maybe the people who truly mattered would stand by me. But, of course, Caroline wasn't done. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone flooded with messages. Friends, coworkers, even a few distant relatives. All of them had sent texts or left voicemails. At first, I couldn't figure out what was going on, but then I saw the notification. Caroline had posted on social media. There, for everyone to see, was a long, tearful post about how she was struggling and heartbroken because her husband had shut her out and was now abandoning her in the cruelest way possible. She didn't mention the affair, of course. Instead, she painted a picture of a lonely wife, neglected and unloved, forced to make the difficult decision to find support elsewhere. The comments were filled with sympathy, people calling her brave and telling her she deserved better. It was like a slap in the face, watching strangers rally around her, completely unaware of the truth. My anger surged, and I wanted nothing more than to reply, to expose her lies right there in front of everyone. But I knew that would only play into her hands. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to lash out, to prove her right. So, I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and did the only thing I could think of. I called my lawyer. I explained the situation, every painful detail, and he listened patiently before giving me some advice that, at first, felt impossible to follow. Mark, as much as you want to defend yourself publicly, you need to focus on the divorce. Anything you post or say could be used against you in court. Let her dig her own hole. The truth has a way of coming out. I didn't want to hear it, but I knew he was right. So I stayed quiet, even as the messages poured in, even as friends and acquaintances reached out, confused and hurt by what they thought I'd done. I felt helpless, trapped, like I was watching my own life spiral out of control while Caroline continued to play the victim. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call from my boss. "Mark, can you come into my office?" he asked, his tone serious. "We need to discuss something urgent." I could tell from his voice that it wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I drove to the office with a pit in my stomach, dreading what he might say. When I walked into his office, he was sitting there with a folder on his desk, his expression unreadable. "Mark, I received an email from a woman claiming to be your wife," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "She's made some allegations about your behavior." My heart dropped. I opened the folder and skimmed through the printed email. Caroline had told my boss that I was unstable, that I had been emotionally abusive, and that I was lashing out at her in dangerous ways. She even hinted that I might be a threat to myself or others. I looked up at my boss, feeling a mixture of shock and horror. "None of this is true," I said, my voice barely steady. She's trying to destroy me. We're in the middle of a divorce, and she's doing everything she can to make me look like the bad guy." He nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Look, Mark, I want to believe you, but we have to take these kinds of things seriously. For now, I'm going to ask you to take a leave of absence while we investigate this matter." It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I had worked for this company for years, poured my heart and soul into my job, and now, because of Caroline's lies, I was being forced out. I left the office in a daze, feeling like I was living in some kind of nightmare. She was tearing down everything I'd built, piece by piece, and I had no idea how to stop her. That night, I sat alone in our empty house, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. Caroline hadn't just broken my heart. She was trying to break me completely. I knew I couldn't keep this up, couldn't keep letting her destroy everything I'd worked for. I had to find a way to fight back, but I didn't know how. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, took a long, bitter sip, and stared into the darkness, wondering how much more I could take before I finally shattered. But something inside me refused to give in. I'd already lost so much, but I wasn't about to lose myself. If Caroline wanted a war, she would get one. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done fighting yet. That night, as I sat alone in the silence, nursing my glass of whiskey, I realized I couldn't afford to stay passive anymore. Caroline had crossed lines I never even thought possible, and if I kept letting her push, she'd leave me with nothing. She wanted to play this game, but now I'd play to win. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. I laid everything out, the social media posts, the messages from friends, the email to my boss. He looked grim but nodded thoughtfully as I explained it all. "Mark, we can turn this in your favor," he said, his tone steady and professional. "Her attempts to smear you publicly, especially the email to your employer, could work against her in court. This is no longer a case of simple infidelity. This is defamation." Defamation. Hearing that word gave me a strange sense of validation. It wasn't just about our marriage anymore. Caroline was actively trying to ruin me, and now we had a way to show the court what she was doing. We started gathering evidence, screenshots of her posts, copies of the messages I'd received, anything that showed her attempts to paint me as the villain. But that wasn't enough. I needed more, something undeniable, something that would prove to everyone what Caroline had become. I decided to hire a private investigator. At first, it felt extreme, but considering what she'd already done, I knew I had no choice. I wanted to know every detail of her relationship with David, wanted proof of her lies, her deceit. I wanted to have something concrete that I could use, not just in court, but to finally clear my name with everyone she'd lied to. The investigator was efficient, a quiet man with a calm demeanor who assured me he'd seen cases like mine more times than he could count. "You're not alone in this, Mark," he told me. "Some people go to great lengths to cover their tracks. But don't worry, I'll find what you need." A few days later, I got a call from the investigator. He wanted to meet in person, said he had some preliminary findings. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I showed up at his office, heart pounding as he handed me a manila envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, Caroline and David, meeting at a hotel, holding hands, sharing moments that made my stomach twist. Seeing it all in print, captured so plainly, was like a punch to the gut. I had known it was real, of course, but this was irrefutable. "She's been seeing him for at least 6 months, based on what I've found," the investigator explained. "They're careful, but not careful enough. These meetings are frequent, routine. It's not just a fling, Mark. She's invested in this." I swallowed hard, looking away from the photos. Knowing she'd been lying was one thing, but to see her so openly, almost happily with someone else, was another level of betrayal. I thanked the investigator, paid him for his work, and left with the envelope, feeling numb. Armed with this new evidence, I knew I had to reach out to a few key people, friends, family members, anyone who might still believe her version of events. My first stop was Caroline's parents. It was a nerve-wracking drive, knowing I was about to shatter the image they had of their daughter, but I couldn't let her lies go unchecked. When I arrived, her parents looked surprised to see me. Her mother, who'd been cold and distant on the phone, softened a little as I sat down with them, envelope in hand. "I didn't want to come here like this," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "But Caroline has been telling people things about me that aren't true. I thought it was time you knew the truth." I handed them the envelope, watching as her mother's face shifted from confusion to horror as she flipped through the photos. Her father's jaw tightened, and he muttered something under his breath, clearly trying to keep his composure. "I trusted her," I said quietly. "I trusted her, and this is what she's been doing. And now, she's out there, telling people that I'm the one who abandoned her." Her parents were silent, clearly shaken. Finally, her father spoke, his voice filled with regret. "Mark, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. She's been telling us that that you'd grown distant, that you didn't care about the marriage anymore." "It's all lies," I replied, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. She's trying to protect her own image, but I'm done playing along. They apologized again, promising to talk to her, to get the truth out of her themselves. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small victory, a crack in her carefully constructed story. With her family now aware of the truth, I felt a renewed sense of strength. I went to a few other friends who'd been caught up in her lies, sharing the evidence, letting them know that everything she'd said was a fabrication. Slowly but surely, people began to see through her facade. Her perfect, sympathetic image was starting to crumble, and I could tell she was feeling the pressure. That's when she tried one last tactic. She showed up at my door. It was late in the evening, and I was just sitting down to try and relax when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find Caroline standing there, looking tired and worn, a far cry from her usual polished self. "Mark," she said softly, her voice pleading, "can we talk?" I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. I let her in, watching as she took a deep breath, struggling to find the words. "I know you've been sharing things with people," she began. "I get it. You're hurt. But can't we just move on without tearing each other apart?" I stared at her, incredulous. Move on? After everything you've done? After the lies, the manipulations, the attempts to ruin my career? She flinched, but quickly regained her composure. "Mark, please. We don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. I'll back off. I won't say anything else, I swear. Just don't take this to court. Don't drag my name through the mud." It was almost laughable, hearing her beg for mercy now that the tables had turned. But I wasn't about to let her off that easy. "You're asking me to let this go," I said, barely able to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "After everything you've put me through?" She looked down, her expression shifting to one of desperation. "Mark, please. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But think of everything we had. Don't throw it all away over revenge." I took a deep breath, looking her in the eyes. "Caroline, you threw it all away the moment you decided to betray me. I'm just picking up the pieces." She was silent, defeated, and after a few moments, she turned and walked out, her shoulders slumped. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was the end, and there was no going back. A few weeks later, we found ourselves in court. My lawyer presented the evidence, the photos, the social media posts, the messages she'd sent to my employer. Piece by piece, he laid out the case, showing the judge exactly who Caroline was and what she tried to do. Caroline sat there, looking small and defeated, her once bright confidence shattered. The judge listened, his expression impassive, but I could tell he saw through her. The evidence was undeniable, and when it was over, he ruled in my favor. The divorce was granted, and she was held accountable for her defamation. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was finally over. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, all of it was behind me now. I was free. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. The scars from Caroline's betrayal were still there, but I was learning to live with them, to move past the pain and find a new sense of purpose. Friends who had once believed her lies reached out, apologizing, offering their support. Her parents even visited, apologizing again, saying they'd had no idea of the extent of her actions. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. One day, as I was walking Sparky in the park, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe easily. I was no longer defined by Caroline's lies, no longer trapped in a marriage built on deception. I had my life back, and I knew, whatever came next, I would be stronger for it. Epilogue. A year had passed since everything happened, and Mark hardly recognized himself. What once felt like endless pain and betrayal had slowly faded into a distant memory, a shadow of a life he had finally left behind. With each day, he rebuilt his world, piece by piece, learning to trust himself again, to find joy in the small things. But the biggest change came in the most unexpected way. 6 months ago, he met Rachel. She was everything he never knew he needed: kind, genuine, and understanding. She listened without judgment, accepted his scars, and, most importantly, never made him feel like he had to hide who he was. They spent countless evenings sharing their dreams, their pasts, and their hopes for the future. And somewhere along the way, Mark realized he had found something real. Now, as they stood together in their cozy kitchen, Rachel's hand resting on her growing belly, Mark felt a warmth he'd never thought he'd feel again. He looked at her, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, his hand gently covering hers. "It's strange," he said softly, almost to himself. "A year ago, I never thought I'd be here, standing with you, waiting for our child." Rachel looked up at him, her eyes filled with a love that felt as steady and real as the ground beneath him. "Life has a funny way of surprising you, she said, squeezing his hand. "You deserve this, Mark. You deserve to be happy." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he truly believed it. He had found his way through the darkness, and on the other side, there was love, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. As he looked at Rachel, knowing they were about to welcome a new life into the world, Mark felt at peace. The past was behind him, and his future was finally, beautifully, in front of him.